What makes a narrative in video games? A question I think we ask ourselves a lot. Games nowadays are a lot more story driven than they used to be. Back in the 70s and 80s, the plots were pretty simple: shoot the enemies, make it to the goal, etc. There wasn't really a way for them to follow complex narratives thanks to hardware limitations. It wasn't until the resurgence of video games with the NES and Sega Master System that video games started to have true stories beyond a simple objective. The idea of a cutscene started to develop around this time, with games like Ninja Gaiden having characters react to the situations around them. It felt like we were watching a movie in iconic scenes like this one. Objectives stopped being important to the player and started becoming important to the characters as they became more fleshed out and became real people rather than a blank slate. They had motivations, faults, fears. But even then, something wasn't quite right. A lot of these games still had similar themes with their characters, those being stereotypes. Take a look at them, why don't we? Let's look at the game Punch-Out first. I'm sure you've heard of Punch-Out, right? For those of you who haven't, it's a game about boxing. More specifically, boxing against opponents from all around the world. As you may expect for an 80s game, a lot of these opponents were villainous stereotypes. Glass Joe the Frenchman is a coward with a terrible win-loss record. The German von Kaiser is obsessed with conquering his opponent. Great Tiger is a stereotypical Indian mystic with a turban and gems. The Italian representative is literally pizza pasta, and the list goes on. Even as early as the Wii, where the characters at least speak their native language, not much has really changed. They're the same stereotypes we've seen since the NES, with new ones added like Bear Hugger. Fortunately, even being white and American didn't mean you were safe. Take a moment to think. How many prominent female characters were there during the era of the NES? Princess Peach, Princess Zelda, Samus Aran, Sypha Belnadis. Those are definitely the main representatives, so take a look at what 3 or 4 of them have in common. They need to be rescued. Sypha is turned to stone, Peach is kidnapped by Bowser, and Zelda is kidnapped by Ganon. All of them need to be saved by the main hero. The only remaining member of the 4 is disguised as a boy and only reveals herself at the end of the game. Even when they started to become playable, they more often than not specialized in magic. The White Mages of Final Fantasy were focused on healing. Zelda and Sypha had great magical power. Maria of Final Fantasy was focused on healing. They were still defeated by enemies that the hero would overcome. Obviously, the damsel in distress isn't anything new. It's certainly nothing unique to video games. But it's still worth knowing that this treatment continues in the series' most infant for it, like Mario and Zelda. They're receiving more playable appearances, sure, but they're still spin-offs like Baseball and Mario Party. And in the main titles, they're still just rewards for beating the game. Fortunately, it doesn't end there. LGBT representation is an issue nowadays, isn't it? With increasing awareness, there obviously comes increased representation. Entire games have been made where that's the narrative focus. So let's look at how bad it used to be, because it hasn't always been this good. In Bare Knuckle 3, localized as Streets of Rage 3 in America, you fight a boss called Ash. Just looking at the footage, it's easy to see what the problem is. This portrayal was so offensive, in fact, that the American version cut him out completely, replacing him with a different boss, and he never returned. Honestly, even as far as 2017, we're still having this problem. Here. This
Who do I need to spank? Come on, gods and goddesses, let's get smiting! This place is popping. I can feel the music inside me. OMG, slay!
Honestly, it's a wonder how this was even allowed to exist at all.
Oh, please!
That's something I'll certainly never figure out. Granted, with all that said...
Oh god, hide, it's my boyfriend!
So, let's talk about how things have gotten better.
Peggy 18.
One of the best examples of this comes from Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed and the character Connor. To try and represent Native American culture correctly, Ubisoft hired a consultant from the Mohawk people, Thomas Deere. Thanks to Deere's help, they were able to make Kenway seem like a believable, accurate portrayal of Native American during the Revolutionary War. Deere advised them on just about everything: music, clothing, architecture, etc. Even more than what names to you, every single one of them had to be unique. He checked everyone mentioned individually, because every Mohawk name had to be one of its own. When you compare it to caricatures like Nightwolf or Chief Thunder, these generic mystic characters who use axes, talk to animals, summon lightning from the skies, are often named after Americanized stereotypes based off weather phenomena and animals. It's easy to see how far we've come. In fact, generally speaking, I would think, more non-white characters are starting to become prominent. Gone are the days of Street Fighter's Balrog or the design of Final Fantasy VII's Barrett, and now we have characters like Eli Vance from Half-Life and The Walking Dead's Lee Everett. When you look at these Mr. T's and these Mystics, natives, it's so easy to see how far we've come, and honestly, it's an amazing change. On another end of the spectrum, however, women are normally seen as damsels in distress or support-based characters in earlier games, but in recent years, some of the best protagonists to come out of games at all have been women. Aloy of Horizon Zero Dawn is a shining example of this, being taught how to hunt and survive from an early age. She solves problems not just through strength, but through outwitting enemies who would otherwise be far superior to her. And yet, despite being a tough and hardened survivor, she's still empathetic when the situation calls for it, and this is one of the reasons that Horizon Zero Dawn was considered one of the best games of 2017. Its entirely amazingly strong female lead. Overseas, protagonist Lightning Farron from Final Fantasy XIII could stand as Japan's own strong female mascot. She's a military veteran actively fighting against the fate that the antagonist has in store for her, fighting fate being a common trend of the game. She can take a variety of roles in combat, mostly based off attacking and dealing damage, but at the same time, despite her stoic exterior, she's ultimately fighting to protect her only family, Sarah, her sister. With such a combination, coupled with her constant battle against fate, is it any wonder she's considered so popular in Japan? She even got 2 spin-off games about her, for God's sake. As for LGBT, like I said earlier, we've gotten a lot of recent games that really emphasize this. Narrative-driven games like Gone Home and Life is Strange portray lead protagonists coming to terms with their own sexuality. Popular first-person shooters like Overwatch and Borderlands are good examples of how to do this without making it feel intrusive. Borderlands is a little more narrative-focused, so it opens up a lot of opportunities to explore the characters, like Tiny Tina, for example. They so casually mention them being gay or bisexual or openly talk about relationships, and it makes it feel natural, like an inherent trait rather than a plot point. On the other end of the spectrum, however, Blizzard took a different perspective. Instead of making it part of their core game, they released comments around the world without cutting the game. For example, one said comments involving tracers going on a last shopping trip to get a Christmas present. Comment we found out that, surprise, it was for Tracer's girlfriend. Another comment revealed that Soldier 76, another prominent character, was in a relationship with another people. It's the little things like this, even if they aren't in the core game, they're still canon to the world, and they provide representation without intruding on the gameplay that people love so much. On that note, what does this all have in common? Makes it work while others don't? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It's respect. People who made these games have respect for the groups they're trying to represent. Every voice actor in Overwatch is from the same nationality as a character they voice. Connor Kenway is believable because Ubisoft took the time to study the Mohawk people. It's a matter of respect and appreciation for the culture of a group you may or may not be part of that creates believable examples of minority characters. That's why these work while the stereotypes of old just don't. That's why as time goes on, we're going to be seeing more Tracers and Maxes, while things like Ash and Fabulous Chiron fade from existence. We're going to have people like Eli Vance, Aloy, Connor Kenway, who are these amazing characters that are still part of minorities without being stereotypes. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. Thanks for watching.